So, Steve, what can we talk about now?
Well, I've been giving that a little bit of thought, fella, and I thought it'd be quite interesting just to see what you can recall, dragging back those old grey cells of yours. How did we actually meet up then? And then how did all this come about?
Right, you want to go back that far? Well, I suppose we have to, really. Okay, so we first met, if I got my dates correct, round about April 1980. No, it would have been November 84, something like that. Oh, fuck, I can't remember. I'll start again. When did we meet, by the way? 84.
I knew I'd be testing you. I think it was when I came back from the golf. So I came back from the golf on the Cribidis in August 84. And then I think you joined sometime in the autumn, winter then. So probably, yeah, maybe October, November 84.
That's right, because I left HMS Aurora in April 84. So I must have gone on extended leave and then joined HMS Drake and then come on to the Charybdis. Anyway, so we're ex-Royal Navy. It was my second ship, but I believe it was your first?
Yeah, Cherry B, the Charybdis, was my first ship. Plymouth-based frigate.
Yeah, Leander class.
Yeah, I'd been down the Gulf for goodness knows 5-6 months. Came back, and I think you rocked up there then. Can you remember why we actually ended up? I was going to say hooking up, but hooking up has got different connotations these days, isn't it?
That's right. Yeah. Language has changed in the 40-odd years since.
Language has changed, mate. Yeah. Can you remember why we ended up buddying up? Basically, was it to provide a united front against other folk who were on board, or what do you reckon?
Well, nothing happens unless it's for a reason. You could almost say it was fated, Steve. It was my second ship. I think similar to you, joined the Navy very young, 16. And 1980 is when I joined. And my first ship was the Aurora, and I was on her for quite some time. And when I started there, I was literally the skin of the mess. I was the youngest bloke. And in the years since, I've been a teacher, and I think, and obviously a parent, as you yourself will know, you look at 16-year-olds and you think, I joined up at 16 into the armed forces. And I survived, and I found it very hard at times because you're in a dangerous world, because you're on a warship, and the guys there, probably much older than you are at 16, they tend to be in their early 20s in the mess. And anyway, I survived. So when I got onto my second ship, I felt more comfortable. I wasn't the youngest, and I'd already been on a ship. And I kind of came into the mess. It was 3 Lima, the back end of the ship. And there you were, already there. And we were about the same age.
Mm.
And we just hit it off, as you would, because you're doing a common thing together. And I kind of could appreciate more what it would have been like for you, because I remember you saying, and I think you reminded me since, you was the similar story to me, weren't you? You was the youngest one at the mess at that time. So that's probably why. It was just the similar age, but also, as it turned out, quite similar interests.
I think that's right, mate. Certainly the story as to how we both sort of came into the RN to the Andrew. So I mean, yeah, I came in when I got accepted when I was 15, joined when I was 16. The Charybdis was my first ship. Yeah. I left training school, the Signals Training School at Mercury on the Sunday, the 8th of April, and on the Monday, the 9th of April, when I joined, on the 8th of April, I joined the Charybdis, having left that previous weekend Mercury, and on the 9th of April, I deployed to the Gulf. So yeah. I was literally thrown straight in at the deep end as a young 16-year-old and was totally and completely out of my depth. It was a nightmare. Really, really hard work. So those sort of 4.5, 5 months on deployment, first of all going through to Portland to do a workup to make sure that you
Oh,
are
boss. Yeah.
to make sure that you are ready to deploy overseas and the ship is in fighting state. Goodness me, you know, smoke grenades going off, people walking past you in a passageway and saying, "Oh, look, there's a fire down there," and you being a bit green, going, "No, there's not, mate. No, there's a fire down there. No, there's not. Really, there's not. You're seeing things. No, you're an idiot. There's a fire down there."
That's right.
Oh, right, okay, I'm with you. So yeah, so that first deployment was really hard work, and I think I learnt a hell of a lot very, very quickly. Certainly, who to engage with and who not to engage with, and how to engage with people, because, you know, young fella, and lots of older blokes who were very worldly wise.
Cynical, one would say.
Yeah, especially on runs ashore, mate. They were quite hard players.
Yeah. You had to learn to grow up very quickly, and you had to learn to handle your drink. And I have to say, in the first year or so at Aurora, I couldn't do either. You're not earning as much money as the other guys. You're trying to keep up because you're young and impressionable. They're all necking it, the alcohol. And I was trying to keep up, and I just couldn't handle it. Probably embarrassed myself and most of my shipmates half the time. But you very quickly learn how to handle that. And I guess you must have been similar.
That's right. I mean, we used to have these, I don't know if you remember, we used to have the gold tins of special vat cider. I don't know if you remember those gold tins that you used to get on board, but there was special vat cider. And I can remember being sat down the mess, and obviously as a 16-year-old, you weren't allowed to draw your beer ration. But a couple of lads chucked some in the fridge and they said, "There you go, Steve, have one of those, mate." And I think I had about 4 of them and ended up pretty much comatose after about 4 tins of this stuff, which was just ridiculous. But you're right. I mean, you learn to grow up very, very, very quickly. And by the time that I had got back, having transited out to the Gulf via Gibraltar, come back via Gibraltar, I think things were a little bit different for me. So no longer the skin of the mess, no longer the junior boy, because as soon as we got back to Plymouth, or Guz as it's affectionately known.
Do you know why it's called Guz?
I believe it was a call sign, wasn't it? Golf Uniform Zulu Zulu. I believe it was the call sign. So we ended up getting back into Guz, and a couple of new guys joined. I think there was a couple of guys younger than me that joined then, so I was like 17, and then we got some new 16-year-olds come on, and you came on board as well. So I'd got a deployment under my belt. You'd got a previous ship under your belt, and I think that seemed to be the way it worked.
Yeah. Of course, on the Aurora, I'd been to the Gulf twice, and I'd done a Far East trip, come out to New Zealand, where we'll talk about that later. We're both living now. I suppose by the time I joined there, it would have been, I'd just say 84, so I was 20. And it was, I was a lot more comfortable, but also, as it turned out, kind of almost over the Navy, because I handed in my 18 months notice on the Charybdis, 85 it was, mainly because I'd met the now wife, and I knew, because every year it was being deployed somewhere for anything from 6 to 9 months.
That's right.
And we won't mention names, of course, but you could see the effect on other people who were going through difficult times with family and wives, and I didn't want to be in that position. So in the very brief time that we knew each other, we hit it off, and I was gutted when you left, because you departed the ship before I did. I left sometime around about 86, early 86, I think it was.
Yep.
You must have left late 85.
85, yeah. So when we came back from the Gulf deployment that we went on together in 85, that's when I pretty much left soon after that. So it was around about November 85. Yeah.
So what was it, 80, about a year?
On the first draft.
That we knew each other on the Charybdis?
Yeah, around about 12 months or so. But hell, mate, 12 months when you are living together and working together and on and off shift together and going on runs ashore together and getting in strife together is like 20 years, really, isn't it?
Well, this is the thing I think that most people, if they've ever been in the forces, they understand, but someone who's not been in the forces doesn't really understand.
No.
Many, many years went by where we weren't in contact with each other. And when we finally met up, it was almost though it was like the day after we'd left. Those years never happen. You just don't find it very difficult to carry on a friendship, because that's the unique thing about the forces. Like you say, you're in this tin box on the sea, and you're doing some amazing things you would never forget, and kind of it's very formative, isn't it, for character. It's a very unique thing, I feel privileged to have experienced it. But it was only a year. But we did see each other again, didn't we? About 1987.
87, was it? 87? 86. Because we actually, when I left the Charybdis, I then went up to northward to HMS Warrior, to the shore establishment. And then I joined HMS Manchester in the March of 86. And the Manchester was then deploying on that wonderful trip called Global 86, which is still one of the most amazing westabout circumnavigations of the globe. It was a fantastic trip in 86. But didn't we meet up on Flashing Light, on Signal Lamp? You're on the Brazen.
I don't know where it was. It was probably out in the Atlantic, because you had yet to go through the Panama.
Yeah.
How did we know? How did I know you was on the Manchester? How did you know I was on the Brazen?
Well, we'd been in touch by letters, hadn't we? Anyway, we'd had
Must have been, yeah.
the old. I think it was the blueies. I think they used to call them, didn't they? The blue airmail type letters that you could get for nothing. Right, yeah. The blueies. Yeah.
Mentioned flashing light because we were both tactical radio operators. So on the bridge wings, you got these massive Oldest lamps, and you're just like pressing down this thing to the side.
10-inch on the bridge wing, was it? And then a 15-inch further back, something like that, wasn't it? You had a 10-inch, you had a smaller one, and then you had a bigger one.
I don't remember the technicalities. All I remember is I was the most ill-suited person for being a tactical radio operator, because I was short-sighted. You're supposed to read these flashing lights at a distance. You must have said, "Is that Jess?" That was my nickname, or JJ or Mark. I said, yeah. And I said, is that Steve? After that, I demobbed in 87. I went into publishing in London. You reminded me I'd sent you some letters, when you read them to me or showed me a copy of it, my spelling was atrocious. This is before I went to university. And that was about it, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was pretty much it. That was probably around about the last contact we had was about 87 by mail.
Yeah. No.
A mail, for anybody that's listening, is ink placed on paper, which is then folded, and then a stamp, which has a monetary value, is placed into the top right hand corner of an envelope, which the paper then gets folded and put into, and it gets posted into this box. And amazingly, it ends up in different parts of the world.
And it always seemed to get to us.
Yeah. It's like the mail drops. You remember the mail drop?
Absolutely. And you were gutted if you didn't get anything.
Yeah, you'd get that big old links that would go out and come back with like 6 bags or 12 bags of mailies, and then it would all be divvied up down in the mess deck, and everybody would be sitting around, twiddling their thumbs and wondering how many letters they were going to get from their loved ones at home. And yes, what a nightmare if you didn't. What a nightmare.
I
always got very highly scented letters from the missus.
Jo was very good like that, wasn't she?
She was very good, and we actually kept our letters. She kept my letters for years. It's only when we moved out to New Zealand they kind of disappeared.
Mm.
The other thing is probably worth mentioning is that when you're out in like the Indian Ocean, you could contact home via Portishead radio, but it cost a fortune, and you can only go on for about 5-10 minutes, and someone was always listening in.
Radphones, they called it, didn't they? Radphone.
Yeah.
Portishead radio. This is the warship Charybdis. The warship Charybdis. Come in, old man. Over. This is Portishead radio, Charybdis. How are you?
Unbelievable. And that only shut down in the early 2000s.
Did it really?
Yeah, because obviously smartphones came on and whatever, the internet. But you don't realise that when you deploy, if you're thinking about family, how lonely it is, because you are the other side of the world often. That's why you kind of form these relationships that end up being very important. They become your family.
Yeah, they do. It's the bonds that you form, as you say, even meeting up years and years, decades and decades later, as I'm sure we'll talk about at some point. The fact is that those bonds are formed, and you always wonder. So when we sort of lost touch in probably '87, and you went off doing your publishing and your career, and then I came out probably about, when did I come out? 4 or 5 years after that, came out of the Royal Navy and then forged my own career. I always wondered what had happened to you. I'd always wondered where you'd gone.
I often thought that. What the hell happened to me?
We had a good mateship, I think, when we were working together, and as you said earlier, we had this common understanding about certain things. We were both interested in history. We were both interested in philosophy. Basically, talking old stuff and talking crap. But there were few people down the mess deck that wanted to do that.
No, and I think that did set us apart. You actually, beneficially, as it turned out, reminded me, because we met again in 2020, but you reminded me in those early days that, looking back, your phrase was, you were always quite fey, as in, like, talk about metaphysics. And it reminded me, we both were, but no one else seemed to be. So we were almost like a sore thumb.
Yeah, little weirdos down the mess deck.
That's right.
People tolerated it.
What are you two doing? Talking about gods and God and spiritual stuff and history. Who gives a toss about those ancient Egyptians? But they're really interesting, actually.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Interestingly, the two ships separated, and like you, I often wondered whatever happened to Steve. And bizarrely, because on the Aurora, the ship that I was there before, the Charybdis, I'd gone out to the forest and came to New Zealand. And you reminded me that I was often talking to you about New Zealand. And you thought, if anyone's going to turn up in New Zealand, it would be him. But lo and behold, you got here before I did.
It's bizarre, isn't it? I was like a first footer.
So when did you come out here?
I came out here, so I got accepted to come out here in 2005 and came out here 2006.
2007 is when I came out.
15 years now, nearly 17 years, coming around to 17 years I've been living out here, which is long enough, right? It's long enough to make you feel like a local.
Yeah. Well, again, when we met up 2020, by the power of Facebook groups, you said, welcome to the whānau. And of course, if you live out in New Zealand, you know what that means. If you don't, it just means, it's the Maori word for a family, extended family. And lo and behold, it turns out that we both were living in the same country, which from England is the back end of the world. And we didn't know. We just didn't know. You're on the South Island, I'm on the North Island.
Yeah.
I came out as a teacher, but you came out as a copper. What got you into policing?
What got me? Well, it's probably because I was never very clever. And so I needed to just find a job. I guess one of the things was, when I was in the forces, was by the time I left, I was married, I'd got kids and all the rest of it. And I was living in married quarters. So obviously back in the day, you could get a married quarter when you were a married guy. You had to be married back then, though. You couldn't just be cohabiting. You had to be married. And then there were all these other rules with it. Oh, gosh. One of the other rules was, if you were a non-commissioned officer, your married quarter was not allowed to have carpets that touched the skirting board.
Wow.
Fitted carpets. Your carpets just had to be laid, but they couldn't be fitted.
Oh, a sumptuary law almost.
Yeah, so there we go.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, no, so you weren't allowed carpets. So anyway, so we had these big, great big, what were in effect mats in our married quarter. But I knew that with children and the wife, going away and spending all that time at sea, as we touched on, that separation, it's just hard work. You can do it, but I was looking for something that would give me the opportunity to be more solidly at home. And so I thought the police would do that, and I'd be able to get a house with the police. I wouldn't have to buy a house. So I ended up policing, which was fantastic. And it didn't do anything that I thought it would do in so much as giving me a stable family life. It just basically pulled at every part of my family life. So it was really hard work from a family perspective. But so that's how I ended up, and then sort of through a whole convoluted series of events, New Zealand police contacted me out of the blue and said, 5 years ago you'd sent us an email saying that you were interested in coming and joining us. Are you still interested? If you are, we're recruiting. Fill in this form.
When was that? Around about 2000?
So that was about 99. I'd
Wow.
expressed an interest to leave the UK and to go and do something else overseas. And I wasn't
Right.
too fussy. I was looking at Australia, Canada, New Zealand, even America. But for lots of reasons, that didn't happen. But New Zealand said, no, not doing anything, but we'll keep your name on file. And you know, you just sort of park those things and think, well, that's never going to happen.
Hmm.
And then 5 years later, they just sent me an email. So we sort of kicked off from there, really.
And you're still a copper?
Oh, well, am I? I'm not anything now. I carried on policing over in New Zealand, and then I came out and went to work in the immigration service in New Zealand, and then I sort of sidelined out into other areas of greyer work, and that's basically where I spent the last, I don't know, 12 years or something like that. So, and very sadly was affected by a restructuring recently and no longer have a job. So that's a little bit of a pain in the bottom, because first time I've ever been unemployed since I was 16.
I am used to that. I did a different trajectory. So I came out twiddling my thumbs and ended up being into publishing with advertising in London. They're bigger pissheads than the Navy. that in that profession. Jo, the missus, was trained to be a nurse. Well, she was a nurse, sorry, in 84. She qualified 88. And I moved to get close to her. I got married in 1990. My son came along in 93. And I looked around and thought, where are all the people in their 40s? It's a young person's game, just because of the sheer nature of what you have to do. And it's very, it's quite pressured. I went away really to get myself promoted, but to companies that potentially I probably shouldn't have joined. And of course, the early 90s, there was this huge recession. They never called it a depression, but it was quite severe. Interest rates went up to about 14%. And of course, the first thing to go is advertising. And a couple of redundancies came along. And, when you lose your job for the first time, as you know, it's a bit of a oof. Ego can very easily come in, pride. By the time it happened to the third time, I thought, oh, I need to move on. And it was a very difficult process of moving away from London back down to Plymouth, GUS. And then I went to uni to do philosophy and ethics. And we were talking, we'll probably do this in a future one, about what was the spur to go into philosophy. Well, obviously, you reminded me that I've always been that way. But also a couple of injustices I came across in our time. It didn't involve us, but I thought, I want to get more into ethics and ethical understanding. And then I went to teaching. Jo, she left nursing, became a teacher. When our two children, the youngest one was old enough, we did a round the world trip after I'd qualified and she'd qualified 2005. Came down to New Zealand and we thought, why not? And then literally we were out here by 2007. But by 2014, I'd left teaching. I was doing a bit of relief to do a couple of books. I became an author and podcasting. And I've had 2 or 3 podcasts now, of which I have a Roman one currently. And I've written 3 books now. So hopefully the third one I'll get an agent soon. But completely different routes. And then suddenly, just as COVID happened, for some reason I kind of decided to rejoin the human race. After being shut away writing books for a couple of 3 years, which is quite draining. And there you were.
Yes.
Well, in fact, what got me first was I saw a picture of me that you must have put up there. And I thought, is that me? And it was. I recognised you, but I had to look again at me. I thought, oh my, it's not how I imagined I looked. Very bizarre. But anyway, that's where we are. And we met up finally when was it? A month ago?
Yeah, when you were travelling around the South Island, we caught up in Christchurch, didn't we?
That's right, and that's where we are. And then you came up with, why don't we do a podcast together or a YouTube channel? So the reason we're doing this is because of you. You're to blame.
Yeah, apparently so. I just thought it'd be nice. One, it gives me the opportunity to recapture the friendship that we had all those years ago, and so it gives us a good excuse to just make an appointment to actually catch up. Because, as you've said, we still live miles apart, different parts of the island, but it's just a great excuse to just be able to get up, catch up, and talk a bit of crap, really, and catch up over the last
Do that.
4 decades, pretty much.
But also, unlike the 1980s, we can do it. We can do it now because of technology.
That's right. Oh gosh, things have improved, haven't they?
Well,
2 steps forward, 1 step back. You know what it is. But yeah, so that's to answer your question. That's why we're here.
There we go. That is why we are here. So basically, that sort of gives us the spin as to how we are now back together talking to each other. It's been a long time. It's a long time between drinks. It was certainly a very long time between drinks. And it's just great to have this opportunity to, one, to have you down here in the Antipodes with me, and two, to be able to just shoot the breeze with you every now and again.